Curiosity began the moment Calder Hayes noticed the faint disturbance in the winter silence. A distant shape moving along the ridge, too slight to be a wandering elk and too slow to be a ranch hand riding in early. Snow sifted down the mountainside like a patient veil, softening the world into white, but the figure kept coming. Calder paused with an armful of split firewood, his breath misting in the cold, and felt the familiar tug of instinct. Something in his life was about to shift, though he couldn't yet name the direction of its pull. Life rarely surprised a man as steady and solitary as he was. Yet this stirred something old in him. He set the wood down and stepped to the edge of his porch, boots crunching. His cabin sat deep in the pines, far from the whispering tongues of town, and visitors rarely climbed this far unless they needed something. He had placed a hiring notice at Etta Granger's store earlier that week, a simple request for a farmhand to help with winter chores, but he hadn't expected anyone to answer until spring. And certainly not on foot. The figure stumbled once, then again. Calder narrowed his eyes. Not a man. Smaller. Thinner. Wrapped in rags instead of proper winter clothes. When she drew close enough for the wind to stop hiding her features, he saw a young woman, late 20s, he guessed, her dark hair tangled, face wind-burned, dress torn at the hem. And then the part that punched the breath out of him. She was barefoot. She reached the last few steps of the path and steadied herself on a tree trunk, chest heaving. Even from a distance he recognized something deeper than exhaustion. Shame, the kind that bends a person inward. She lifted her gaze to him only for a heartbeat before dropping it again, as if the very act of being seen cost her something. "Sir," she whispered, voice frayed like the edges of her sleeves. "I heard you were hiring." I can work. I don't need much. I just need a place out of the cold." Calder wasn't a man easily shaken, but the sight of her trembling, bare skin against snow, hunger hollowing her cheeks, cut him sharper than any blade. He could have asked questions. He could have kept his distance, judged her sudden appearance or the mystery around her. But something in her posture, in the way she stood like someone preparing to be turned away, stripped him of the impulse. "You're freezing," he said quietly. "Come inside first." She hesitated, glancing past him to the warm glow leaking through the cabin windows. Her fingers curled tight around the torn fabric at her waist. She didn't move. "I won't hurt you," he added, the words awkward, almost unfamiliar. He wasn't used to offering reassurance. He wasn't used to needing to. Finally, she nodded. Inside, warmth wrapped around her, and she inhaled sharply, as though the sudden comfort pained her. Calder guided her toward the small wooden chair by the fire. She didn't sit until he stepped away. He noticed her feet, red, cracked, trembling against the floorboards, and fetched a pair of thick wool socks from the shelf. She tried to refuse them at first, shaking her head, shame flashing again, but he placed them gently on the chair beside her and stepped back. She slid them on with careful, almost reverent motions. "Thank you," she murmured. Calder poured her a bowl of stew from the pot simmering on the stove. He handed it to her without comment on the way her hands shook or the way she flinched when his fingers accidentally brushed hers. She ate slowly, as if unused to taking more than a few bites at a time. He let the silence stretch, not uncomfortable, simply honest. "What's your name?" he asked after a long while. "Mara." Her voice steadied, barely. "Mara Ellison." He nodded. "Calder Hayes." She looked up briefly, studying him as though weighing whether he was safe. Her gaze caught on the faint scars on his knuckles, the quiet steadiness in his expression, the way he stood with an ease born of solitude. "I'll work for you," she said, almost urgently. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, handle most chores. I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Calder answered. "If you want the job, it's yours." He didn't ask why she had wandered alone into the mountains. He didn't press for the story behind her lack of shoes or the bruises faintly visible beneath her collar. Those answers could come later, or not at all. What mattered now was giving her a place to breathe. Mara finished her stew and set the bowl down gently, careful not to make noise. She wiped her hands on her skirt, ashamed of the stains she left. Calder pretended not to notice. "You can stay in the spare room," he said. "There's a bed, blankets, a stove." It's warm. Her eyes widened with disbelief, then quickly dimmed with caution, as though afraid of wanting too much. Are you sure? Snow's getting worse. He nodded toward the window where thick flakes spiraled like feathers. Wouldn't be right to send you back out. She swallowed hard, and he saw the moment she allowed herself a sliver of relief. Small, fragile, but present. Thank you, she whispered again, softer this time, as though speaking to the fire instead of him. Calder stepped outside to gather the wood he'd dropped earlier, needing a breath of cold air to clear the unexpected swell in his chest. He had planned for a quiet winter, predictable days and silent nights. But now, inside his cabin, was a woman whose presence stirred something deeper. Responsibility, yes, but also a strange, cautious hope. When he returned, Mara had moved closer to the fire, her eyes half closed, her body finally releasing tension. Her vulnerability struck him with a sense of purpose he hadn't expected to feel for anyone. As the storm thickened outside, Calder realized the night had delivered more than a worker for his land. It had brought someone who carried entire winters inside her, someone who might, with time, thaw in the shelter of his home. And though he didn't fully understand it yet, he felt the certainty settle in his bones. This was only the beginning. Mara awoke before dawn, long before the first gray hint of morning spread across the cabin walls. The fire had burned low, giving the room a muted amber glow that made everything feel softer than she believed she deserved. For a moment, she lay still, listening to Calder move lightly in the main room. Boots scraping, kettle shifting on the stove, the familiar rhythm of a man who kept order not out of pride but as a way to quiet his own loneliness. She watched the shadows dance, feeling a tug inside her, a mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude because she had been given safety without earning it. Fear because the safety felt temporary, like something she might lose by simply breathing too loudly. She rose silently, careful not to disturb the board that creaked near the foot of the bed. She dressed quickly, keeping her movements small, familiar with making herself invisible. When she stepped into the main room, Calder looked up from the stove, steam rising between them like the soft exhale of a waking mountain. His eyes carried a steadiness that unsettled her. She had grown used to people either dismissing her or using her. Being regarded with calm sincerity disarmed her entirely. "You slept?" Calder asked, voice low enough to let her choose how she wanted to answer. She nodded. "I did. Thank you." He poured her a cup of tea. She accepted it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her palms. She didn't drink right away. Instead she looked toward the door, its frame glowing faintly with early light. Something in her posture shifted, and Calder sensed it instantly. "You planning to leave?" he asked gently. Her head jerked in surprise, but she didn't deny it. "I thought it might be easier for you. I don't want to be a burden. The town already talks, I'm sure." Calder paused, then set down his own cup. People always talk. They need something to fill the silence. He studied her, seeing the way she couldn't hold his gaze for more than a second. "But you're not a burden, Mara. Not to me." She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. His reassurance was too kind, too generous. It frightened her because it felt like something she might start to rely on. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door, sharp, decisive. Mara froze, the cup trembling in her hands. Calder moved past her and opened the door. Deputy Warren Pike stood outside, snow dusting his coat. His gaze swept the interior of the cabin, pausing on Mara with a look that made her fold inward, shrinking without even realizing it. "Morning, Hayes," Pike said. "Heard you brought company up here. Wanted to make sure everything's in order." Calder stepped into the doorway, blocking Pike's line of sight. "Everything's fine." Pike tilted his head slightly, a half-smirk tugging at his lips. "Funny thing about strangers showing up in winter. Sometimes they come from trouble. Sometimes they bring it." Mara exhaled shakily, her fingers tightening around the cup. She had heard variations of this accusation her entire life. Calder, however, didn't shift, didn't hesitate, didn't yield to the tone Pike pressed between them. "She came here to work," Calder said. "And she's under my protection while she does." The deputy studied him for a long moment, snow melting against his shoulders. "All right," he finally said, though his eyes carried a warning. "Keep an eye out." Calder shut the door firmly. When he turned back to Mara, she seemed even smaller, breath shallow, shoulders caved. She set the cup down carefully, as though afraid it would shatter. "I should go," she whispered. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." "You didn't cause anything," he replied, moving toward her slowly, as if approaching a skittish fawn. "That's just Pike trying to stir something that isn't there." She pressed her lips together, unable to believe him fully. "People like him, they always think they're right about people like me." He leaned on the table, bringing himself to her level. "I don't care what he thinks. I care what's true. And the truth is, you walked through a storm and still had the strength to ask for work instead of begging for help. That tells me exactly who you are." Her breath hitched. No one had ever framed her survival as strength before. She didn't know how to carry that kind of praise. She turned away, cheeks flushing with an emotion she didn't have a name for yet. The day unfolded in quiet, determined motions. Mara helped with the horses, her touch gentle enough to soothe even the jumpy mare. Calder repaired the fence, glancing her way more often than he intended. Their words were few, but each exchange held weight. Small nods, brief smiles, a passing of tools that felt like more than simple labor. When Mara laughed once, soft, surprised, fragile, Calder felt something inside him rise like a sun he hadn't seen in years. Yet as dusk approached, a familiar unease returned to her posture. She lingered near the edge of the yard, staring at the snow gathered along the path where she had first arrived. "You're still thinking of leaving," Calder said, coming beside her. She exhaled slowly. "Every good thing in my life has slipped away. I don't know how to stay in a place where someone treats me like I matter." Calder's voice dropped to a gentler register. "You matter because you're here. That's enough." She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you so kind to me?" For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply looked at her, really looked, and saw not the worn dress, not the bruised past, but the woman who had walked through snow with nothing left and still carried dignity in the way she held her hands. "Because I see you," he finally answered. "And because I want you here. Not out of pity. Not out of obligation. Just here." Something unlocked inside her then, quietly, like ice melting under a lantern's glow. She stepped toward him, just a breath closer, enough for their warmth to mingle in the cold air. "Then I'll stay," she whispered. "If you're sure." Calder's smile was small but deeply felt. "I'm sure." Night settled around them, soft and forgiving. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting golden light on two people who had carried years of loneliness and now stood on the edge of a new beginning. They didn't rush toward it. They simply let it bloom in the silence between them. And as Mara rested near the hearth, her shoulders finally lowering, Calder felt a contentment he hadn't known he'd been missing. The storm that had once threatened to swallow her became the reason she found his door. The ending of their day was quiet, but filled with promise, warmth thickening in the spaces where fear used to live, and the sense that tomorrow would bring something even brighter.